examples of restoration. What we like to call proof of concept, meaning a lot of folks kind of feel that, oh, well, it's going to be too hard to incorporate native, vegetation to here. There's going to be too much maintenance involved, or it's going to be a more difficult procedure to utilize the natives rather than just to keep it as it is, or to go with the standard methods of bark and mulch and those types of landscape decisions. Well, these few examples, what I want to explain is how, by choosing correct species and by choosing specific native components, that you will be able to, again, enhance the ecological value and enhance the community value of that location. I want to take you over to a site that our tribe has been involved in. These are examples that our tribe has participated in and provided our ecological knowledge, our indigenous knowledge, to the planners so that they can utilize that information in choosing correct species and choosing how the natural function of this landscape, the geomorphology, how that can be enhanced and supported in order to get the benefits. So in one particular location, this is in a location in Southern California, in Newport Beach, that's part of a big canyon area. It's called Big Canyon. It's part of this large canyon that has a lot of urban runoff going into it. And in that urban runoff, it has a little buffer area before it gets to this very sensitive ecological area where many endangered species. I used to do a lot of surveys in this area for, our endangered birds, as well as some of the plants that live in this area, still exist in this area. So having, contaminants and toxins is just not something we can allow, because we already know the detriments that are involved with contaminants to natural ecosystems. So in this particular location, it was all full of invasive species, of non-native species that were trees and shrubs. And because it had been that way for decades, everyone just accepted it. And when the local city decided to, hey, we need to enhance this location because we can't allow this urban runoff because the non-native components weren't doing any phytoremediation. They weren't removing any of the toxins. It was just pretty much flowing through. And it's an interesting area because you have a ton of diversity in the natural area. Then in this one little spot that was full of non-natives, had very little diversity and very little animal activity because the plants just didn't support them. So the decision was made to remove the non-native plants and enhance it with native species. And what was done through the indigenous knowledge component was to place our hydrophytic plants, meaning our water-loving plants. And many of these that we had suggested are our medicine plants, because these medicine plants have the capacity to uptake these essential elements and uptake heavy metals, uptake PCBs, uptake lead, uptake all of these components that are being found in our water systems that have a detrimental effect to any biological process, whether it be through the plants growing or through the animals breeding. All of these have been shown to have negative effects on the environmental situation. So by enhancing this landscape and changing it from a non-native, invasive landscape, which unfortunately is a component of much of our landscapes around us, especially we have dynamically changed the soil compositions, the even structure and geomorphology of locations where it's now difficult for native plants to survive in these locations. We have changed them in such a way that to be able to revegetate and in some ideas, restore the landscape becomes very difficult. But by supporting it appropriately, it's still possible. And that's what's shown in this location. This landscape was degraded altogether and didn't belong next to a very sensitive location, let alone any location. I mean, all locations, in our opinion, in the indigenous opinion, is a significant and sensitive location because it all wants to provide support for us. And if we don't provide support for it, that's where the breakage comes. So this example shows that we can, just by loving it and supporting it, change its ability and its morphology, its composition to be able to support the native flora and the pollinators. But because we've manipulated it so much in the past, I'll tell you this, there may be hurdles. There may be parts that, why is this thing not growing? Why is it? And in many instances, it's due to compaction of the soil. It's due to different composition of the soil. It's due to not having the light source that's available because you have a whole other canopy of non-native trees next to you or something. There's all these different variables that can occur that will reduce or inhibit the ability for the revegetation process to be robust. But it's still gonna happen. And by us supporting it is what's gonna allow it to happen. So this is an example of a location where we had to remove everything and replace it. And that's possible. Now I want to discuss a location where you already have quality habitat. And let's say you want to institute some recreation into it. You want the community to be involved in it. Now, what you're looking at now is a location over in Malibu. This is in Las Flores Creek and Park. In this location, you had old growth sycamore and oaks. Trees that are hundreds of years old. These trees, actually, there are two old growth trees, sycamore and oak. And they are hardwoods as well. They were used for, heating, to all the different cooking, to all the different elements that you need. And they also were very useful in communication of locations. The sycamore was regularly used, at least by our tribe in Southern California, to identify locations, significant locations. In particular, locations of burials, but also locations of springs. And these trees were manipulated in such a way where they could be pointers or they could be beacons to show, because on our landscape in Southern California, we have low growing scrub. So when you're walking on that landscape and you look upon the horizon, you'll see a big old tree sitting there because all the rest are just shrubs. Now we use sycamore for this rather than oak because oak kind of grows at the same height and creates a horizon line. So it's not too noticeable when you're looking at it, but sycamore grows like a beacon. And so when you're traveling on the landscape, you see that sycamore and you know, oh, there's a spring there. That's where I'm going to get my water. That's where I have a place to sleep at night. All of these indicators that were utilized by these trees. So they had tons of communication value as well. But today, our generation, we want to hold on to them because they have tons of ecological value. Old growth sycamores have so many cavities in them that they provide houses for tons of different animals, from mammals to birds to lizards to all these different components. And you don't get that in new trees. You don't get that when you have non-native trees. So having the retention of these components rather than removing them and replacing them with, a new sycamore, that reality is something that has to be considered because retaining all old growth is the best decision for any of our habitats. So now this location, through master planning, through deciding in the beginning what you're going to do, Today, you can go to this location and not one single tree has been degraded or destroyed because it was understood where the canopy is, where the drip line is, all these essential components. Like I said before, you have to consider the needs of that tree or plant, not just the need of your planning or where you want to place something. You consider the needs of the habitat. And then when you think of that first, then you can start implementing all these other uses because it can happen together. It's possible. And that's what this location that was done by a company that our tribe works alongside of, it shows the capacity of, if you just think a little bit of the needs of the habitat, of the particular species that are already there that you want to help enhance, that you can have your cake and eat it too, in a sense. Because that environment, especially just the shade and just, the components that old growth forests provide. I mean, number one, it takes hundreds of years to get them. So we can't create them in our own generation. So by considering them and protecting them, but still being able to incorporate some of our human activities alongside, because they're not meant to be pushed off behind a fence line. They're meant to be interacted with. We want to interact with, all of the wonderful gifts of our Creator. So through proper planning, through acknowledgement and recognizing the needs of the landscape that you are to enhance or to revegetate, that those efforts will lead to benefits to our community, to the wildlife, and mainly to our future generations. Because it's them that are going to reap the benefits of today's decisions. So what my uncle always taught us is that when you're tasked to make a decision, if that decision is only upon you, it only affects you, do whatever you want. But if that decision affects anybody else, then you need to think 7 generations ahead and how it's going to affect that generation. Because it's truly the decisions we make today do have that effect. So it's up to you to help in that effort of creating a better, brighter future for your grandkids and their grandkids.